Hey there, viewers and listeners. This is Stays again. It's been a while since I last recorded a podcast like this. This is Joe.
Joe is back.
Joe is back, and that's what I wanted to stress.
With video this time.
With multiple angles of video. So for those who have been following my podcast and my video channel, I know there's few of you because I've been neglecting this little thingy. But Joe is back, and Joe is back because last time I interviewed him, it was one of the more fascinating interviews I did. There were some malfunctions with the video. That has been sorted out, so that means Joe is all the way back.
All the way back, yes. I think that time was also back in London at PHP UK conference.
Yep.
In 2014, 15? 2015.
Yeah, I remember, yeah. It was a fun time, a good time there. And we talked about your interesting journey in life, decisions that you've made. No, seriously. So let's give you the brief recap, because otherwise we'll be referencing to things that you as the viewer and listener are unaware of. Do you do it yourself, or do I do the elevator pitch?
You should do the elevator pitch.
I'll do the elevator pitch. Joe is a young and talented developer/entrepreneur, originally hailing from Lithuania.
That is true, yes.
He came to Edinburgh, Scotland, to study computer science. In the meanwhile, also founded one or more companies.
Yeah.
Did some community engagement. Ended up on my radar. We got in touch with each other by attending PHP conferences. I learned about his story, about the fact that you're quite ambitious, that you have cool hobbies, and that you're an all-around cool and tall guy. After that, I've heard about your story that you wanted to move to New York City. Quite naively thought that would be an easy thing to do. Or you thought there would be difficulties, but there were more difficulties than you anticipated.
I thought it was going to be a quick process. A difficult but a quick process.
It wasn't?
No.
You were homeless for longer than you'd anticipated. Well, homeless, just did some traveling.
Yeah, I was basically a digital nomad for over a year.
And the plan was to have it to be a digital nomad for X amount of months? How many months?
Well,
what was the plan?
The plan was to maybe spend a month or two traveling, at most. But the longer it went on, just made no sense to stop doing it. So I didn't even know what a digital nomad was.
Or how you should do digital nomading.
I don't think anyone at the time was talking about it, which was like, I think in 2014. There was no digital nomads as a thing. I don't think I knew that term at the time. But then as I did it, all of a sudden I learned that that's apparently what people do all the time.
What were some of the key takeaways from that period of time in your life? Like briefly, a couple of like bullet point things you've learned?
Travel lightly, so bring nothing, because you don't actually need anything. Most people bring, I think, too much baggage. Now I have a carry-on bag, and I never used my massive suitcase in like years. I never check anything, I just bring my own bag. And also, I would say, instead of spending little time in many locations, go for a long time in one location.
Makes sense.
Because it takes a few days to kind of get adjusted to the local ways, and you just kind of learn things and kind of understand what you should be spending attention. And if you just quickly run through things, if you're following some kind of a tourist guide where it's like, oh, do this, do that, do that, do that, it's not enough time to appreciate things. And not appreciate things in like art way, but actually like, it's not enough time to be able to like, hey, this is New York City. I've seen all the default things. I've seen Times Square. I've seen Central Park. Now what? Like, what are the locals are doing? Like, what are the kind of off-beaten path things that people are doing? And that just kind of takes time. So anytime you travel, I would say, hey, go to one location, spend longer, as opposed to trying to maximize as many locations as you're trying to do.
What about social interactions, friendships, personal relations?
Oh yeah. So that is probably one of the biggest drawbacks of the whole digital nomad way, is that it's harder to make like long-lasting relationships because you're not in a single place for any long time. So I mean, you can always find people and you can always find friends, and like, but then you have a lot of friends all over the globe, and none of them are in the same location as you are for a pretty long period of time. So I would say if you get a chance, and some of the successful people I know who do this now, they travel with their wife or with their husband, so they don't need that relationship part because we already have one, so they can just do all the things I was doing, but also have a relationship happening, and it makes it a much better experience, I think, than for just a single person go around the world do that. But at the same time, you should do it even as a single person, because why not? It's easier to travel. It's much easier to travel if you're just a one person, as opposed to having a group of people or even just two people.
Fast forward a couple of years, you've been through that, you have a visa,
I'm done. Yeah.
you have a business in the US.
Mm-hmm.
I know you started out, if I remember correctly, with a toy company trying to figure out, or was just selling goods on marketplaces, specifically on Amazon, and finding out algorithms for pricing and stock and those sorts of things.
That's roughly what it is.
That where you started, back in Delaware?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the whole toy thing was the historical setup of the company. So it used to be a toy company selling toys in physical stores. But then it became like an everything store, which sells anything you can think of through the means of marketplaces. And I mean, I can talk forever about.
But that's where you learned the ropes.
Yes, I would say yes. Like that introduced me to the U.S. economy and the way things work in the U.S. and the role marketplaces play in this whole realm of e-commerce.
So what was the next step?
And then since then, I started Marketplace Pulse, which is a business intelligence agency focused on e-commerce. So we try to understand marketplaces and we try to understand e-commerce through data. So there's a lot of interest both in the US and globally in growing e-commerce. Like even here in the Netherlands, I think e-commerce is only 10% of actual retail. And there's a lot of interest in growing it, but what you would realize is that pretty much every country globally, most of e-commerce, most of online retail happens on marketplaces, which in Western Europe and US, it's Amazon. In China, it's Alibaba. Alibaba is also spreading in Southeast Asia and India and other countries.
AliExpress, I guess, as well? Like we buy stuff at AliExpress.
AliExpress is very big in Russia. It's also very big in India, I think, as well, for people who want to buy things into the country. But ultimately, it's a single company, like any single company who just sells things cannot grow big enough to support massive countries. And that's why marketplaces exist, because a company like Amazon focuses on infrastructure. You can think of it in like, they're doing the same thing as they're doing in the cloud. They're doing the same thing for physical retail. They're building infrastructure like warehousing, payments, ad services, fulfillment, insurance, warehousing. They're doing all that, and everyone else is doing products. Everyone else is working on supply and demand. And that allows Amazon, the website, to grow really big, even though it actually consists of all these random smaller companies. So it's kind of a fascinating world to see. And like a lot of countries are now excited because, for example, Amazon is coming to Australia.
Which was not the case until recently?
They're coming, I think, at the end of this year or next year, and everyone's freaking out.
Wow. Amazon is not even in Belgium, where I'm from.
No.
So I either have to go to UK, France, or Germany.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, Amazon as a company will probably enter all the European countries. For them right now, Belgium is just too small. Too small in the sense of like they need some minimum size of economy to support what they're doing. So building out warehouses, building out websites, all that for a country which only has X amount of size.
Yeah, of course. But then again, the consequence of that is that local players, Benelux players, could enter that market right now. And in our area, bol.com is one of the big boys.
Yeah. So most of the smaller countries, especially in Europe, have their own little sites. For example, Amazon has recently bought the leading e-commerce website in Dubai to learn about their local e-commerce. Like, they're expanding, but the reason I'm talking about this is that as Amazon expands, it allows everyone else to expand as well. And then all these industries get created, which both for selling and infrastructure, which grow with Amazon as Amazon is growing.
So what is your angle on this? So you founded a company called Marketplace Plus, right?
Marketplace Pulse.
Pulse. My
so
apologies.
the angle is that we measure marketplaces. So we look at For example, when it comes to Amazon, we look at how many sellers are selling on Amazon. How well are these sellers doing? What type of products are we selling? What type of categories are we selling in? What type of brands are we selling in? And how is that changing over time? And what does that mean? And what does that mean globally? And what does it mean for sellers themselves? Like what they should be looking at for the future. And then it's kind of, it's in a sense researching Amazon, eBay, Etsy, Walmart, other marketplaces as if they were economies themselves. So in the same way Bloomberg treats massive big public companies and economies, and they collect data and they analyze that and they publish about that. We do the same thing, but specifically about e-commerce, and tend to be specifically about marketplaces because in most economies, marketplaces are the biggest ones to think about. And there's only so much you can do about like smaller sites, like the one you mentioned. There's nothing to analyze that in that because there's nothing to measure.
No.
And for marketplaces, we can measure things. For example, we look at one of the core principles of a marketplace is that it has a concept of feedback. So usually when people buy from eBay or Amazon or from Etsy, they leave a comment about their purchase experience, and if you can measure those, you can see how many feedbacks are they getting every day, and then how many of them they're getting over time, and see what that tells you.
So, and are you tracking those feedback and trying to get like emotion out of it based on text recognition patterns?
We don't do emotion, but we look at, in general, positivity or negativity, and then amounts. How does that amount fluctuate over time? And that tells us the sort of sellers which are successful, the sort of products which is successful, etc.
Do you sell reports or do you sell analytics?
Both. So a lot of our reports come out as articles.
For free?
Yes. So it also has become like one of the most read, I think, and at least one of the most objective kind of blogs / journals about e-commerce. We write 3 to 4 articles a week, usually data-driven. It's kind of like data-driven journalism, which is interesting. And we publish those, and I guess we have like mailing lists and all that kind of stuff. But so there's a lot of consumption through that, and then there's in the back of it, there's very specific things for very specific companies.
So one thing feeds the other by gaining attention and
like
credibility.
We're publicly shouting about things we think we believe in. Like, for example, we talk about the relationship US e-commerce has with China, or US e-commerce has with people making private labeling products in China. Or we recently talked about the growth of fidget spinners, these toys, and what that we think means for the future of retail and for the future of supply and demand optimization. And we keep saying those things, and it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, it's just that's what we think it is. And some people agree with that, and those people who agree with that understand how we look at things, understand why we look at things, and
understand your value.
Yeah, and then they understand that we know what we're talking about ultimately.
And then they get more a personalized approach by becoming a client of yours and digging deeper and seeing metrics that weren't discussed in your articles.
Like for example, if you're a hedge fund, our articles to you are not really useful because they're too vague and they're not detailed and specific enough, but they can be if you wanted to. So an article is kind of a tasting test. Like this is what we could be doing, but in a vague scale, that's what it is. But like, if you wanted to, you can actually talk to us, and we can actually do more detail.
The data you collect, is that publicly available data?
Yes, but we built infrastructure to kind of extract that data. So I would say Google indexing is trying to build semantic data extraction. Since we focus on a particular field, all we do is semantic data extraction. So it's focused on a particular thing. And I would say, one thing I would add to the whole article thing is a lot of people now do content marketing. And I would say almost always it's garbage because they put too much effort on marketing and not enough effort on content. I think we put 99% on content and 1% on marketing. And that's why almost is content marketing, but it's actually a content on its own. And when you read it, you can trust it because it's not saying like, hey, 5 tips to make $1 million on e-commerce.
No.
Like we're writing real things. And I think a lot of startups and a lot of small companies make a mistake of writing blog posts from a content marketing point of view, which is just like bashing out SEO optimized nonsense in the hopes that people read them. I don't know.
But where you
we treat them like I think we even have like journalist standards. Like we really care about what we write, and like it's real and it's not made up and it's backed up by facts and you can verify those facts.
and the people who aren't really attracted by the style of writing aren't maybe the customers you're aiming for.
Yeah, like we've been writing enough, but like even people like Wall Street Journal and like USA Today and Inc. magazine and like even lately BuzzFeed, like they read that and they're like, this is real. Like it's not just some nonsense gibberish. It's actually real content, and that's to me nice because like we are doing something which is achieving multiple goals, but at the same time, on its own, it can stand against scrutiny because it's actually real content. It's not just nonsense.
So what does the future bring for you? Like you've been, and I should mention this because it's a big deal. You were published in
In Wall Street
in,
in Wall Street Journal.
in the Wall Street
I
Journal.
did my first little quote, and then I think a week after I had another one, which was very nice.
So what does that mean to you? Like there has been an effect. You have felt the consequences of that probably?
Once Wall Street Journal publishes about you, your LinkedIn catches on fire, and all of a sudden everyone wants to be friends, and everyone wants to have coffees and have meetings. So we'll see what it will bring, but I think I can see it being a very important step, one of many hopefully, to something much bigger than it is right now. Because it's a big deal. It doesn't matter what you say it is, but like once big publications like Wall Street Journal say that's what you are, all of a sudden it gains credibility and gains value.
Of the right kind of people.
Of the right kind of people. Yes.
So that's what keeps you up at daytime, or that keeps you busy during daytime, maybe keeps you up at night, but
yeah,
living in New York at this that really fast-paced tempo, living the dream, is the American dream. Not sure if that is the case, but there's other stuff you're involved in as well, I guess. Living in New York seems that brings opportunity to you.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you do on a personal level?
Lately I've been spending a lot of time on cycling. Yeah, I think cycling has lately become like a #1 hobby, just because how easy it is to do. Like all you need is a bike and you can just go and ride it. There's no like setup. You don't have to fly anywhere. So I've been biking probably 10 to 15 hours a week, which is quite a lot.
That's a lot.
I think it's been 200, 300 kilometers a week of cycling. Not in the city itself, but kind of escape the city as soon as possible to avoid all the traffic.
You could be a bike messenger if you want.
You could.
Or get killed while trying.
Yeah. But you kind of escape the city as soon as possible, and then you just bike kind of outside the city. Like New York very quickly goes from a massive collection of people and buildings and skyscrapers to nothingness. So you can just go and bike calmly there.
So like from your place, do you just take your bike and drive someplace, or do you take public transportation to some place calmer and then hop on your bike?
No, I just ride my bike. I mean, I could take the train, but it takes me less than an hour to leave the city. And even that hour is mostly on like a bike path, which is kind of meant for that. There's, like if you think about New York, on the west side of it, along the river, there's a bike path. So I just need to get to there, and once I'm on that, I can just.
That's the bike path you always see in Casey Neistat's videos, I guess.
That's
that walks
the same one.
to WTC tree, like World Trade Center tree. Yeah, that one is
exactly the same bike
millions of people have watched that one.
So the only problem with that is all the tourists and all the people walking in. So it's still not incredibly safe. I mean, it's not just bikes, it's just random stuff on it.
The same thing that happens on the Brooklyn Bridge. There's bike paths there, but everyone's all. And I noticed that when I was in New York, I did the very same thing, and then I noticed like I shouldn't be walking here.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people pay attention to
some
that.
of these bridges have like, if you're a person, you should be on this side. If you're a cyclist, you should be on this side. But no one actually pays attention. All of a sudden, everyone's mixing in. So yeah, riding, before you escape the city, I think to me, people are the biggest concern than cars. Because cars are somewhat aware and they're on the road, so like there's an understanding.
And a clear separation of
Yeah, but
where
if
you
you're
should be.
on a bike path and there's people in it and they're like walking in, yeah,
Could hurt.
yeah.
You
Because
could
I
break
mean,
your collarbone.
yeah, because like bikes are pretty fast. So I mean, like even in a city, I can be easily doing 20 miles an hour. That's pretty quick. So if someone jumps in front of you, there's nothing you can do.
Nope. Now,
So-
you told me that as soon as so it's a really dense area, and as soon as you leave that area, it's just a bit more
Yeah.
calmer, rural. What's that called? Because I'm aware of the boroughs and the fact that New Jersey is on the west.
I don't even know.
What happens. What's it called?
Well, first of all,
What's south of Manhattan?
so first of all, I would take a bridge over the river,
Yeah.
and then that puts me in New Jersey.
Yeah. Okay. You
If
go
I-
westbound. Yeah.
But then if I keep going north, I re-enter New York again, which is funny. So basically, I go from New York to New Jersey, back to New
To New
York.
But New York State, that is.
New York
not
State.
Not New York City.
And I mean, there are, there are towns of some kind, but
that are in a county.
in a,
Of
yeah,
some
I mean, there are
sorts.
some smaller towns, but ultimately, most of that way is just, I don't think it's a highway. It's just like a road, like a 75-kilometer-an-hour road, like a one-lane road, and then you ride along it. There's, especially on the weekends, there's probably more cyclists than there are
And I
cars.
noticed that there's hills and there's nature, and these
pretty
are
hilly.
things that you don't associate with,
Yeah.
with New York City.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it takes, in a car, probably, in a car from New York, in an hour, you can get to some proper mountains. They're not actually mountains, I mean, they're more like hills, but they're
Let's talk about cars for a minute.
Cars, yes.
Because you've been racing them, but that's like the next step. The first thing I noticed is people who live in New York City don't really own a car because it
No.
doesn't make sense, because if you want to buy a garage, I think you will easily spend $1 million on
Sure.
actually
Sure.
buying a garage, and parking is too expensive and it's clogged with taxis and delivery.
Mhm.
So you ended up at the Classic Car Club?
There's a magical place in New York called the Classic Car Club Manhattan, which has been set up now, I think over 10 years ago, by these guys called Mike and Zach. And their idea was that if you live in New York, you cannot own a nice, fun car. And even if you did, you wouldn't be using it that much, so why bother?
Yeah.
And what they did was they formed a club which owns cars, from classic cars like 60s Porsches, like the most basic ones, the early ones, to the most modern supercars, as far as like some Lambos and Ferraris as well.
It's a membership kind
And
of
then
thing?
and then they have a bunch of members. I think it's pretty limited because they only have so many cars. And as a member, you can rent or use those cars.
Use or rent, because there's a big difference.
Rent. I mean,
You have to pay.
it's technically a rent. I mean, as a member, you have kind of a balance of points, and then you spend those points on renting these cars. And it's almost like car rental place, but I don't want to call it a rental place because I think it's so much more, and it kind of devalues it devalues the car club, because it's a collection of people who care about cars, and they do events and they do all sorts of things. So like calling them rental cars, I'm like, it's not Hertz, it's not Avis, it's like,
Yeah.
it's more than that. And I mean, when it comes to picking up a car, it's kind of the same process. You have to just say, I want that car, this is how much it's going to cost you in terms of points. The points, of course, have dollar value, so it's kind of the same thing.
And if you run out of points, you have to buy new ones, or is your turnover, you have to wait until the next?
You can always top them up.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because it's a business for this guy,
yeah.
right?
I mean,
Obviously.
you can always top them up. And of course, like depending on the season, in the summer, the cars cost more because it's summer. And in the winter, the car costs less because it's winter and no one actually wants to drive it.
It's a bit more of an exclusive thing, I guess, because otherwise everyone in New York would be doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's not a rental place. You can rent cars, even supercars, from many of these places. Anyone can rent them. But in this case, they formed a club and they have like a limit of how many people they allow to achieve exclusivity and to make sure that the people who drive these cars appreciate them and they don't beat them down. If you go to Vegas and you try to rent a Ferrari, you will soon learn that if you go for like the best possible deal, that Ferrari is absolutely horrible. It's beat down, probably doesn't even have the power anymore. Like the seats are all run down.
Probably an old Testarossa.
Yeah. Like even in the new ones, I've
Yeah.
seen some videos. They look absolutely garbage. But in a car club, I mean, they're all really nice cars, and it's driven by people who appreciate cars and don't like destroy them. Because especially when it comes to classic cars, anything like 20 years or older, these cars are incredibly fragile when it comes to cooling or just the way they've been treated. They have something, they have one of the more unique cars they have a replica of Ford GT40 from the 50s, from the 60s, which is a replica of a Le Mans winning racer car. It has no traction control, no ABS, no safety, anything.
And that's road legal?
It is road legal and it can do 200 miles an hour. So, like,
deal with it.
There's a, like, you cannot rent these cars usually because there's like you will crash one in a tree. It's like that's what sort of car it is. But like having a club and having somewhat vetted people who understand what they're doing.
So how did you end up there? Because it's not like you've been living in New York for 20 years.
I watched a YouTube video initially, randomly to be honest, and I saw them and I remember writing an email to them and then this guy Adam replies and he's like, hey, maybe you should be a member, and that was it.
Whoa.
Like that was not.
So they scrutinized you a bit. They looked into your.
I don't think there was much scrutiny. I mean, we talked about what I've driven before, and I guess there was some kind of a face control test. And then I remember just before I joined, they were like, well, because it's the US, they're like, we have to check that you can drive manual, that you can drive stick. Which, I mean, I don't know if you haven't been to the US, most people don't know how to drive stick.
Luckily, we're Europeans.
Yeah.
We're
So
stick driving
they
people.
gave me this E30 M3, which is like the first generation M3, which are now super valuable. And it was, I remember, like fully decked out. Like it had a roll cage in it, like bucket seats, like these crazy bucket seats, like a massive massive mirror. And I remember sitting in it, like in New York traffic, in basically a track-ready racer car.
With the exhaust all kitted
Yeah, it
out.
was all kitted out, and we drove like a bunch of loops, and he's like, okay, I guess you can drive stick. And like once I actually like, since it's an old car, like synchros got out of sync, so like I couldn't shift the gears, but eventually I did shift them. But yeah, that was I guess, part of the phase control. I don't think they have like as strict requirements, and at this point, I think it's mostly member referrals, so they don't have a lot of capacity to allow new members in. So usually the people who are allowed in are the people who know someone.
Yeah.
So it's like a
Yeah, there was also a Casey Neistat video on that.
Yes.
Maybe I should include some of the footage
yeah.
and overdub this.
Mhm.
I think that would give them
Yeah, so
lots
Casey
of attention.
Neistat, I don't think he's a member. I mean,
He's
they
just a
gave
friend.
they gave him a car, of course, but
But the exposure you're getting for that is huge.
yes.
I
Oh
guess.
yeah. But at the same time, they haven't been doing a lot of marketing since they don't need to.
No.
They have no trouble finding people, so for them it's just kind of whatever. But lately in New York, over the last year they expanded to a massive, big new location, which means I guess they're trying to attract more people who not necessarily want to drive the cars, but want to go to events, because we do a lot of events. Like recently they had Lucid Electric, which is a new supposed competitor for Tesla cars. It's a 1,000 horsepower electric car. I mean, it looks like, it's a four-door sedan. It looks completely normal, but it has insane horsepower.
So yeah, Joe, you're obviously interested in biking, in fast cars. You love New York City.
Yeah, it's great.
You love IT, and I think you found wouldn't call it the niche because it's a very mainstream thing, like adding
Right.
value to e-commerce or like
Yeah.
companies who want to get invested in e-commerce. Any final advice for our viewers here?
I would say always say yes to opportunities to do something you probably shouldn't be doing. So if someone comes to you and they're like, you should do a bike race, on a bicycle, you should say yes. And that's what I did this year. I did my first 100-mile, 160 kilometers cycling race. If someone says, yeah, you should do a racing thing in a car, say yes, and that's what I did as well. If someone comes to you and they're like, well, you should do try to climb mountains. If there's people who want to add you to their group and kind of want to take you on their own journey, always say yes, because you will immediately go from having no experience in whatever that thing is to having some experience, but usually years worth of experience, because they took you with them and they shared everything.
And even though it seems like that thing they're taking you, that journey they're taking you onto, has no relevance to your business or to your interests,
It always ends up that
it
way.
always ends up that way. I could be the judge of that. I had some opportunities. Other people say, "Why are you pursuing this? This is just a waste of time." And in the end,
Yeah.
there's always something
You should
happening.
you should never you should never try to decide if whatever you're going to do will have value. You can only connect points looking back.
Yep.
Never connect points in the future. Sometimes the most random things you do will eventually lead you to insane things in the future. But if you don't do them because you think they're not going to do, you will never find out.
And that's a nice way
You
to
should
end
always
this
say yes.
podcast. Say yes, look for opportunity, even if it doesn't seem that relevant. This man can be the judge of it. Follow Joe. I will link his social details and his marketplace post link on there. Thank you for checking it out. I know it's been a long time, but there's more to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you.